When China invaded Tibet in 1949, the flow of one of the world's last ancient civilizations was brutally interrupted. More than 1 million Tibetans died as a result of the Chinese invasion, and today, over 60 years later, 6 million Tibetans continue to suffer but peacefully resist the destruction of their culture. In 1959, the Dalai Lama fled to India. Since then, 150,000 Tibetans followed him into exile. Many found refuge in Asian, European, and North American countries, but most of them have settled in India in the foothills of the Himalayas. It is there, in Dharamsala, that the Dalai Lama established the Tibetan government in exile. For 3 generations, Tibetans in India have lived in refugee communities. India has welcomed them in solidarity, and this gesture is a proof of the bonds that link the two cultures.
I'm a Tibetan born and brought up in India, studied here, lived here all my life. My parents came from Tibet. And they came from Tibet because they had to escape the persecution by the Chinese. With His Holiness the Dalai Lama and a number of Tibetans who escaped from Tibet in those years of 1959, 60. So they came to India as teenagers. I was actually born on a roadside when they were road construction laborers. So I inherited all the history, the culture of Tibet, and also the struggle. The government of India, unlike any other country, has actually given the exiled Tibetans the most support, not only physically with all the infrastructure, even given us the freedom to nurture and grow.
Tibetans' biggest challenge in exile is the preservation of their culture, language, and identity. It is a struggle shared by all generations and which they lead with growing determination and courage. While looking towards the future, Tibetans are also cherishing their past and, in the struggle to preserve their culture, they often sacrifice their present.
Before 1959, when Tibet was independent, there was no need for such a department, preservation and all that. But now, since Tibet has been occupied by Communist China, and they are systematically destroying everything of Tibetan, so it became necessary for us to have this department in exile.
In exile, Tibetans have built monasteries, schools, and art centers, a living sanctuary for their culture. Tibetan architecture, painting, sculpture, and performing arts are deeply rooted in Buddhism and were traditionally taught in monasteries. In order to keep these art forms alive in exile, Tibetans have established art centers where they train hundreds of people with a sense of urgency but also timeless patience. The most important Tibetan visual art form is Thangka painting. Every step of the creative process requires time, patience, and devotion. The artists themselves make the paints by grinding semi-precious stones. Each Thangka takes months or sometimes years to complete, and they are never signed. The composition, proportions, and colors of each scroll painting are done according to specific scriptures. Finished thangkas are framed in fabric tapestries, usually silk, and are used in temples or home shrines. The same attention to detail is found in traditional Tibetan wood carving. Artists are trained for many years and are able to create elaborate altarpieces, furniture, and everyday objects. As in the case of thangka painters, they make their own tools and follow strict subject matter and composition rules. While thangka painting and wood carving are art forms involving a single artist, other traditional Tibetan art forms require a collaborative team effort. Thangka appliqué is one such example of collaboration, with every member of the team specializing in a specific task. Appliqué thangkas are completed over a long period of time and are mostly commissioned by temples and religious institutions. Another traditional Tibetan art form that requires the collaboration of several artists is sculpture. Metal sculptures are not molded, but individually crafted throughout a lengthy process in which attention to detail is paramount and no effort is spared in order to achieve results as perfect as possible.
I am an artist and a collector. I had an art gallery for about 26 years in Montreal. When I was young, I was very interested in everything mysterious and hidden, and also I was interested in religion and the divine and the things we couldn't see, and these miracles. That was all interesting for me. And I had a little booklet about mysterious Tibet, this country, very small country hidden in the Himalayas, and where the thousands of monasteries are all over the countryside, and where actually nobody more or less can go and see what's happening. But there was the saying of yogis and saints, and I was very intrigued by that. When I had the art gallery and did sculptures myself, I started to look into sculptures, and I found the Buddha statue was very, very nice and peaceful, and the Tibetan sculptures were the most peaceful, radiating the compassion and the love which is in their philosophy and religion. When I started, it was Tibetan sculptures, and now it's Chinese Tibetan. It's called Chinese Tibetan. And when I look at them, I think it's a sad story that they are taken from where they belong.
I have such a close relationship with Tibetan community, and I start hearing this self-immolation. I start painting. It's political, social, but also very environmental. I also have great concern about what the Chinese government is doing back in Tibet. Burying all the nuclear waste, digging all the mines, and contaminating all the water source, taking land from nomad people.
As in the case of visual arts, in exile, Tibetans have built institutions dedicated to the preservation of their songs, dance, opera, and costumes.
This Tibetan Institute of Performing Arts, it was first set up, founded by His Holiness Dalai Lama. Just he escaped from Tibet in 1959. And so this is the first institution in the Tibetan community in exile. Its aim is to preserve and promote the Tibetan culture through the performing arts. So that's why, in this institution, we kept all the Tibetan costumes, Tibetan performing arts related to the Tibetan performing arts, all taught in this institution.
The Institute's teachers volunteer and teach children who are not officially enrolled in the Institute. Although born in exile, Tibetan children are taught traditional songs as a means to learn about their past and preserve their culture. The Folk Museum features traditional costumes from all Tibetan areas. In the context where the Tibetan dress is no longer allowed in schools and often relegated to folk festivals, institutions like this one are crucial for the Tibetan communities in exile. It is especially important since many of the Tibetan traditional clothes were specifically related to lifestyles that are now under threat in Tibet. Such is the case of nomads. In spite of UN and human rights groups' appeals, 1 million Tibetan nomads have been forcefully resettled by the Chinese government.
These days in Tibet, the Tibetans, they sing a Tibetan song. The words are Tibetans, but way of singing is totally Chinese too, And also the costumes. They really met different costumes of Tibetan.
When we sing or talk about our religion, preservation of religion and culture, then the Chinese governments, they arrest There are many cases of Tibetan artists being detained back in Tibet because of their songs.
Tibetans inside Tibet have been stripped of their basic human rights. When artists, writers, and activists fight for the preservation of their culture and religion, they know they risk prison, torture, or death. Tashi Rabden, writer and editor of a banned literary magazine, was detained in 2010 in connection to his writings. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison, but his whereabouts and well-being are unknown. Kunga Tseyang, monk, writer, photographer, and environmental activist, was detained in 2009 and sentenced to 5 years in prison. His whereabouts and well-being are unknown. Tibetan author, poet, and blogger Tsering Wasar was honored with the prestigious International Women of Courage Award in 2013. China denied her a passport necessary for her travel to the US to receive the prize. Paljor Norbu, master printer of Buddhist texts, was arrested at the age of 81. Sentenced to 7 years in prison, his whereabouts and well-being are unknown. In 2012, documentary filmmaker Dundup Wangchen was awarded the International Press Freedom Award for his documentary film, Leaving Fear Behind. His wife, Lamo Tso, tells his story throughout talks and film screenings around the world.
Ni choagi da nidong jela koran chinda simbin chin chu ni ma jure da koreng juya gi jimsindi da nge koreng gi bonnang ko boba denjela nidong jegi olympic chemu ganglan dopa yume ta ni lakpar da kundun ga kundun la da ma pola phe gangla samchu khara yumi di tune logni jigde lamni living fear behind lamni logni chisobri de la tine ni da koran jure jubu ma che ni lothula timtak che yore timtak che bde da 지금 당딩 틈덕지 자원이 제요 말이 다디 짐진 가르스나다 안주 남미 준이 틈주바 제메니 체브데이나 니차 틈주바 지주요 말이 디치디다 니돈 젤라다 본능기 사자 망부지라니다 지 보조가 심가 놀러라니 다 네츠베드 자탁보 시라차가요리 지단기 nga chulo lene kaje shebena다 니돈 주닌 고증니 단다바도 유럽 놀러다다 아리 놀러 제급 khasala 망부지 안두유 아니기 저디 당 뭐네 저랑 시기 미시양 지 코란라 누베당 학벌다다 재미 책임인주 책도징이 자원이 시기메라 안티 짐친 저디 간스나다 코란가마 정공노나 유디 잠바니 ngamaina 코란라다 니마질라 치수 줍딘질라가 치주요래 아니 단달래가 됐어 영어로 줘요래 다 땡에 다랑 랍게 재미기 내가 조구에디 내가 조구도지라 아니 단다 내가 양을 땅디 양을 땅샤싱이 갑두 랍게 유미시션 양 코란라 학벌때 노예 저우당 인 재미기 치민주든 주 치기 열에서 시기 매자니 코란라 자니니 누구 말이 섬게
A big dimension of the work of the CTC is promoting and advancing the Tibetan culture in Canada, partly because it's such a fascinating culture and also because it's at risk of extinction in Tibet itself. So in particular, we've invited His Holiness the Dalai Lama on a number of occasions to come here and speak about ethics for the new millennium, secularism in education, peace and compassion. These are the issues that he has spoken to Canadians about in large numbers, and they certainly represent an essential element of the Tibetan culture. We're also active at the international level, trying to encourage international institutions such as the United Nations to protect Tibetan heritage and culture. For example, right at the moment, we're on a campaign to encourage UNESCO's World Heritage Committee to take steps to ensure that the Chinese protect heritage sites in old parts of Lhasa, in particular around the area of the Jokang Temple. At the moment, there's been extensive demolition in that part of Lhasa, and the demolition is designed to make way for a shopping mall and a parking lot. So we have been appealing to UNESCO's World Heritage Committee to please put these parts of Old Lhasa on an endangered list and to send an investigative mission into Lhasa to look at what actually is going on there. On a local level, we've had cultural days since the beginning of the CTC. Since the founding of the CTC, we've hosted annual cultural days which celebrate Tibetan music, Tibetan food, Tibetan crafts, and these are very popular with Canadians, and we continue to do them year after year.
Outside India, small Tibetan communities living in exile struggle to preserve their culture and identity. Such is the case of the Tibetan community of Montreal, a small but very active group of 100 members. They organize regular dance, music, and Tibetan language classes and shows. Their children, the second generation to be born in exile, accompany their parents to rallies and vigils for the Tibetan cause. Many of them have never seen Tibet, yet they continue the struggle their parents and grandparents have carried before them.
The kids are now small kids. They're playing Tibetan music, lute, and dancing very well.
The Tibetan culture and religious, it's very dangerous inside the Tibet. You know, especially in the school, most of Chinese people cut the Chinese Tibetan subjects, and they put the Chinese in the language, everything in Chinese language. So there's no way to learn Tibetans. So some of them go to the monastery and learn Tibetan in the monastery.
The Tibetan culture is genuinely in danger of disappearing when the seat of the culture, Tibet, where we're facing the challenge of assimilation and where our language is relegated to songs and dances and saying we have Tibetan language classes, but there's absolutely no practical use for it. Obviously, it's just a matter of time before the usage of the language dwindles. So, of course, it's fundamentally in danger because the rest of the Tibetan community lives in various host countries, and that in itself is a challenge whether you live in Europe or North America, maintaining just your language is difficult, let alone the culture.
The Tibetan language as a medium of instruction is not allowed at the university level, high school level, even the middle school level. Not only at primary school level, because they are in remote villages, Tibetan was used as a medium of instruction. That is also discouraged. That is why you see students coming out in the streets. So Tibetan language is very much under threat in Tibet, under the occupation of China. Hence, it's very important that Tibetan language ought to be preserved and promoted inside Tibet particularly, but also in exile.
Many of the Tibetans who cross the Himalayas into exile are children. Their parents send them to India so they can learn Tibetan, as well as Tibetan literature and history. Tibetans living in settlement camps in India often have to send their children to Tibetan schools in faraway areas. Most of the time, they do not have the means to see them during the holidays and thus spend many years apart.
It was very hard for me. In fact, after getting into school, I had never been to home for 16 years. Back in Arunachal, we don't have Tibetan school. And even if you make it to Indian school, then it's about risking, your own culture. That if you go to Indian school, then you won't know Tibetan language. Even if you speak in Tibetan, but you will not understand you will not know how to write in Tibetan. Staying in school for almost 16 years without going to holiday vacation, I've known so many students who are from Tibet, and especially good teachers, and they were so kind to me. And in fact, the school was like a home. You are open to everybody.
In exile, the young generation has combined tradition and contemporary means of expression. Contemporary Tibetan literature and art are often activist and serve as a means to carry the message of the Tibetan struggle and appeal for the support of the international community.
Every day when I read the news, I feel very sad because in China have so many suppression. People get arrested. When I go through the list of people dying or arrested, they get hurt, and the number is, you can't imagine, it's a lot. And when I see those Tibetan, they have no choice because in China they don't have rights to voice out. I mean, the media get blocked. They can't go inside to interview, even though media would like to help. But China just being very rude and say no, not welcome, and just treat those Tibetan like a prisoner, and not as a human being. And I think this is very unfair to them because we need to respect everybody's human right.
No human rights in Tibet! No human rights in Tibet! No religious freedom in Tibet! No religious freedom in Tibet! Shame on China! Shame on China! World is watching! Shame on China! World is watching! Shame on China! World is watching! No human rights in Tibet! No human rights in Tibet!
We all know that Tibet is locked down. No press can go there. No international fact-finding delegations can go there. There are no witnesses to what is happening inside Tibet. The international press demands proof, evidence of what's happening. China knows that, and they make sure that people don't get to go in and see what's happening inside Tibet.
My biggest goal of working here at Payul is to bring out news from Tibet, closest as possible to the truth, to the reality, as soon as possible, as fast as possible. But as you very well understand, that inside Tibet it is not that easy to communicate with people. It is we might be risking many people inside Tibet if we bring out news, if we choose to bring out certain stories that might not have a great political value. We get reports of things of candle marches, of prayer ceremonies in monasteries, but at the end of the day I have to decide whether bringing out a story about a simple prayer session in a monastery would actually do any good, rather than do more harm to those people there who had attended actually the prayer service. For us, bringing out the news is not that simple. We have to keep in mind what may be the repercussions, not for us but for those people inside Tibet. That is a big challenge for us as well. You know that when you go inside a monastery, people everywhere are looking from you because there are cameras all around you, on the streets, in the monasteries, in every small alley there are cameras set up, and then people are always looking at you. You know that even if you try to do something, within 10 to 5 minutes they'll be there, the police will be there.
Before the Chinese occupation, Buddhist monasteries were the heart of Tibetan culture. Since the Chinese invasion, religious persecution has escalated to alarming levels in Tibet, with monasteries being managed by the Communist Party and monks and nuns being forced to denounce their spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama. In spite of this, monks and nuns are still at the forefront of the struggle for the preservation of the Tibetan culture and religion. Although subjected to regular re-education campaigns by the Chinese Communist Party, they are dedicating and often sacrificing their lives to the preservation of their people's identity and heritage.
나도 생각되나 다치 생각나라 좀봐 고주 고딘도 고질 좀 지도 손잘 지저레스 대나네 아니 저수 좀 바란데 시잘 하지죠 당 아주 생각도 대비선 남녀서 뜻소 제시다 나눈서 가서 내다 당야들레스 슈체시다 아니 내다 당 걸다 내다 그린 담만졌던데 당그레스 아니 감 시도 당 아주 저수 좀 더절래 그 손로 조개라래 마도 나저 조개 써야 돼요 말이지. 제가 재미가 메타와에는 나저 조개 레군 로거를 생각해서 민다. 얘는 나저 조가 나저 전 레갈 있어 돼요 말이지. 손로 조개 땅 인생에 컴바나 루샤야 드레스. 나저게는 배날 데비컬 다 나저 랭기 빼기야기 다 생각 저게 전세 다가라레스. 가이선 아는 나저게 리존다 상마 거점 매바 속여야 돼. 아는 나저 대야 라소이마 체도 아니 다가랑 레스타는 아주 거저기 소소기 그 네동 재미기 다 인생에 네동 같이 땅면은 아주 지sen수 차한다고 자원이는 믿어스 가인사나 코 미리지도 저거지기 된다 이 무슨 아는 아주 그래서 소소기 어느 간토도 제거스
ngay cái amdongawa hanani yar lo sunju sokhche che dele teni yar la sa yo lo chonga ye ani lo chonga no ni kare jin na chong chembo jani manga le ga chong chong jin zin ani za han zu chong khang zu da yo ni zin yin na te ga la sa na lo ni sam ja ni ram ma yong de ram na de ne lo juni che so juni no ni ji ga zar zara chong jani zin ji ga che zin men da ni te par un ne ngi cha na no yin zu ge te dong kho go chen ja ga yo yin no ja ga yin no ja ga che ma yang tu lo sa le ton du an di pa la ni ma chen du ni ja me ge ja 파체네 람카니니 나닌 젠제니 까짜티 송 까짜티나 가르체 송사 저이진으로 자가 쳔베사 킬레메 키말레나 코자 하고 있어 아니가 삼로지다 쳔나 쳔요레 적질레네 쳔마는가 쳔베치 이진은 자가 쳔레베 레손 아니가 잘라르 키요레 잘라르 크네 따가 까짜티 몽보츠 주제니 니마 몽보나 까짜티 라만라치 테니 마르카체 자소 르카체 총코노 도동자 빠빠 요요 부두데샤 미 자치노 동구 찬로도 네 암동가 웬즈가 빠스메사 몽보요레 다자가 그래서 토마 때랑 가서 빠서 저가 지금 말 안동아에 저거 때니 강바자니 몽보여 강가 주지 냠도 몰라서 로 자치 든지 부로 정아서 좀 주저지 강가 냠도 두여래 이나 자야나 이분도 아니 또가 강가 돈이 너네 돈이 로살레토라스 때기 인스가 빠스 때 다시 또 야용난 거 따라가서 저거 가자 가르치기 도잖아 때로 가서 야만 저축만도 빠스지 저거 상노니 때 천근노니 천장 티스 잡고 때니 상노 상장 티스 잡고 per수 잡고 응자 전부 잡하면 가르이나 저나노 동호가 자체열네 제가 잡하냥도 때니 공안 주노에 티스고 고이보다 티스고 티스 가면은 때로 가서 하사 되면 저거 응자
I was born in Tibet. I joined in this monastery in the beginning of 2005. Actually, I came to India in the beginning of 2000. From Tibet, we paid a guide, and we have a group 24 members, and we came through the snow mountains. First came to Nepal, and then in Nepal Tibetan reception to send us to Delhi, then sent to Dharamsala. It takes 20 days by foot. 3 ladies sick a lot. but the other members help them, and some of them bring, bring them during the night, and we all safely get to the Nepal. Yeah, I didn't see any police because most of the time we start our journey in the night, and around 3 or 4 a.m. we start to go hiding.
Some people, they don't know the road, they have to come slowly. Sometimes they confuse the road. Again, going back, there are many ways for coming. Some of them buy food, mostly they buy food, up to Nepal border. From there, they can buy transport.
12 years ago, I traveled the world, and I had the opportunity to visit Tibet for 1 week on a tour. And I had read previously stories on Tibet, and I was fully aware of the situation in Tibet and knew that a chain of mountains separated me from the Tibetans. And so as I was walking, I was imagining how people would escape that area and come seek freedom in Nepal and in India. And it humbled me because I had met Tibetans on that path. We as tourists pay for these trips, but when the Tibetans escape, they come with barely anything. They starve in the hills and the mountains and freeze sometimes to death, lose fingers and whatnot, ears, parts of their bodies just to find freedom.
As of now, from 2009 till 31st December 2012, 95 Tibetans have self-emulated. That's only for the sake of culture, for the religion and culture, for they have self-emulated. We are not getting kind of satisfactory reaction from the world community. And the more important, we in exile are not able to, convey the message of those people who left the message. They want Dalai Lama back to Tibet. His Holiness back to Tibet. They want Tibetan religion and culture to be protected. They want freedom. They want human rights in Tibet.
What we've been telling the Chinese government is to revisit their policies in Tibetan areas, because the Tibetan people are speaking through these self-immolators, saying that the policies that have been implemented in Tibetan areas for the last 50 years are unacceptable. The Tibetan people are categorically rejecting these policies. When we look at the ages of the self-immolators, we are witnessing a generation that was born and raised under Chinese occupation. So they have experienced firsthand these repressive policies.
옛날에 뒤통이 지금 랑류 매석 당주 점선 조가 졸라 로아 미르라 옆에 랑가 졸라 강요 말에 가츠 뽑아 참아라요 말에 매주 전 매주 간다 가츠라 출릭 답아 라무당 아니 가이고 쪽 당관당 랑가 예쇼 콘시 다 간당 간다 디랑가요 마다니 마주 랑관당 아니 지 다음 런드 그랑 스타니요 말에 아니 지 출릭 답아 라무테 강가 통이요 말에는 가츠라 소테 Natsu tapashesi yete jagan tanchen chimbare. Tinsin teni natsu nawa sanje yimbi chani natsu tapashesi yete so 다 자가는 뭐지 공이나 공거 급을 샤강던 공아 답을 샤강 싸니 요마 대동 총피 출릭 자고 모아서 가서라 필켄지크 요마 라마 지친다 가서 본는 메마리 요아리라 코론솔라 출릭 아니 지금 출릭은 잔찬티모 페주 그런 뭐 체크 출릭 가스 티 출릭 필고 필 가스 고아 있나 저렇게 나니 지 클림 모아서 지고아다 아니 지다 지금 머크 지금 쇼르징 그 쇼니 소소 지금 마탑 지금 적 마축비 지금 마즈 까차 티슈가 클린 지고가 요아 다가 가이 외적 같은 가이 외적 같은 시바이나 아니 지금 로차 갖고 나이나
whenever they have the big religious activities, the Chinese authority already be there and control over and keep eyes over the public. It's, I think it's very difficult.
In Tibet, the volumes of scriptures unlimited, almost unlimited. Every monastery have one whole set of Buddha's teaching, as the essential asset. So therefore, Chinese were not able to destroy all. Because in meanwhile, we have been able to take out one set out into exile, even more than one set. So that we can, kind of multiply.
In the US, an impressive online database preserves and displays thousands of digitized literature, history, and religious works brought from Tibet by refugees. The Tibetan Buddhist Resource Center is a database of over 7 million pages, getting thousands of visitors daily. It exemplifies the Dalai Lama's call to be 21st century Buddhists by using contemporary technologies in order to preserve an ancient wisdom and tradition.
Non-Tibetan, non-Buddhist, all over the world are taking interest. Nowadays, the invitation to His Holiness the Dalai Lama to give teachings by him is numberless. Now, Chinese from mainland China are coming to listen here to him. Koreans, Singaporeans, Taiwanese, Vietnamese, in nutshell, from all the South Asian area, and American and Europeans, of course, yes, there. So it's now widely spread in the world.
Back in the early 1970s, I was a hippie with long hair and African trading beads, and I was looking for my teacher. And while all my friends were off in Goa and in Cambodia and other places, I actually happened to find my teacher on 10 Sherwood Street North in Rosedale. And over time, the more I became involved in the Tibetan community, the more I realized that there was a rare culture, a rare message that was in some sense spawned and nurtured since 8 AD, which was only now coming to the West and how much we needed this message in the West.
I moved to Boulder, Colorado in 1996 because of a spiritual path that I wanted to follow. That was the head of the school was there in Boulder. And I started to get really curious and really interested in Tibetan culture and in the Tibetan Buddhist spiritual path. And I recognized that there was a tradition in Tibet that had existed for thousands of years without any kind of external input that seemed to me to hold a lot of keys to both from a scientific and from a heart perspective to the cessation of suffering. And that was important to me in my life. And I've always noticed that Buddhists, whether they were Tibetan Buddhists or Vietnamese Buddhists or Buddhists from Thailand, they always had something about them that I got curious about. I felt was a mystery to me, how it was that they managed to live life in a peaceful way, in a way that was nonviolent, in a way that seemed actually happy and joyous and full of laughter. Like when you see the Dalai Lama, the thing that always strikes me is how much he enjoys laughing.
When His Holiness came in 2007, we were driving as volunteers some of the monks around, and some of these monks spent 20 years in prison, and they were brutal conditions. But when you talk to them, they had the capacity, the knowledge, the wisdom to go through that and still retain their humanity. And you rarely, if ever, hear of them speaking about their oppressors with anything but compassion and understanding. That's a remarkable thing that we all can learn a great deal from.
In North America, we tend to think of the concept of resilience as very connected to impairment. So people have had these experiences in their lives of trauma, but yet are they able to continue working and maintain relationships and continue kind of being productive members of society? And Tibetans don't necessarily think about resilience in that kind of way. It's much more linked with the way one experiences distress in the mind. Although they had experienced, perhaps even severe trauma, the negative emotions associated with that experience weren't taken to be so solid and fixed in time. And of course, this is linked with Buddhism and the notions of impermanence and how the mind shifts and changes over time. And so to kind of solidify distress and to come to identify with it is really antithetical to Buddha's notions of well-being and healing.
Although Tibetans have become a minority in their own country, they pursue their peaceful struggle with renewed strength and determination without ever compromising their commitment to nonviolence.
Between His Holiness the Dalai Lama and all of us Tibetans, we don't own a gun, or we don't have that kind of money also. But we don't need. What we have is the practice of love and compassion in our daily life that will take us to a free Tibet.
Tibetans are suffering immensely. Yet, we subscribe to nonviolence. We subscribe to democracy. We subscribe to dialogue as the means to solve the issue of Tibet. Tibet is a test for the international community because we subscribe to and have been practicing democracy and nonviolence for the last many decades. Generally, international community praise democracy and nonviolence as the means, as the best means to govern one's community and lead one's movement. And Tibetans have been doing it for decades. Yet, concrete support from the international community is comparatively behind what we see in Syria or other places. When international media project many of the Syrians who are given guns as freedom fighters, trying to overthrow Assad. It makes us wonder, what is the priority?
One of the challenges is making the international community understand how important it is to support political movements that are based on nonviolence. Supporting Tibet is not a zero-sum game. You can be a friend of China and support a resolution for the Tibetan question because it is in China's long interest to do so.
The Tibetans in Tibet, monks, nuns, nomads, and students, they came together with a new idea, a brilliant idea called Hakar movement. It says that Wednesday is the soul day. It's a special day of puja for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. We need to celebrate it. We need to celebrate it by coming out and doing special puja, all of us together. And on that day, wear Tibetan dress. On that day, speak Tibetan. On that day, sing Tibetan. On that day, celebrate you being the Tibetan. And that was inspiring. Because when you do this, it doesn't cost you life. And Chinese government cannot arrest you because you are dressed as Tibetan. This celebration of culture was not only a source of pride and sense of identity for the young Tibetans, it was culturally empowering. Now here is a movement that is bringing Tibetans to their own roots, to their culture, to their language, to their religion.
In Hakar, we also not only talk about like our culture, our identity, but gradually it is also taking shape as a non-cooperation and civil disobedience movement. It's been like almost now 54 years that Tibet has now been ruled by China. And inside Tibet, Tibetans become minority. And outside Tibet, you can see Tibetans spread across different countries. So at that time where we are kind of like, a threat, where China government is making policy which will actually make Tibetans to lose their culture, their identity, their language, it has taken a form that Tibetans will be reasserting their identity, their culture. It has grown into a global movement, and we connect, Hakar connect inside Tibet and outside Tibet.
It was because of what's happening in Tibet with the Chinese invasion that so many lamas and so many rinpoches left the country and went into the West. And in some strange inverse of the sadness and the misfortune of that situation has become really our fortune, in the sense that we're being introduced as a Western culture to teachings that we may not have otherwise been introduced to. And I think these teachings are really important at this moment in history. Like, I really have the feeling that the notions of interdependency and interconnectedness, the notions that, I and you are not separate, we are not different, the notions of opening our heart to one another, I think these are all things that are seeding in our cultures right now.
Had I been in Tibet, I hail from a nomadic family, semi-nomadic family. I have agricultural land. But we have in family agricultural land, we have livestock. Now I am supposed to be a good herdman, So I would be the good herdman, not an officer or the secretary of Department of Religion. And I would not have met so many people that I met, all very wonderful. So that situation has changed because of the occupation of Tibet by China. But then they have not done it for this purpose. They have just grabbed it. But we take, good points that it has happened. So it is my hope that the world people will understand the problems of Tibetans inside Tibet and will support us. If we are able to get our objective, this will give a lot of inspiration to the future generations, not only for Tibetans, but the whole of the world, whereby we can create really a peaceful, harmonious, loving atmosphere and society which we need.